Job hunting has a particular kind of desperation built into it that most people only fully understand once they've lived inside it for a few months. The way each rejection makes the next application feel more urgent. The way a good offer starts to look less like an opportunity and more like a rescue. That specific desperation is exactly the kind of thing that makes a person stop asking questions they'd normally ask, right at the moment those questions matter most. Tonight's story is about a woman named Nora Kessler, a company called Meridian Holdings, and a job offer that came with exactly one detail nobody could ever quite explain. If you've ever accepted something good without letting yourself examine why it felt too good, you already understand the particular blind spot this story lives inside. Keep it close. It's the whole reason Nora ended up where she did. Nora was 32, 8 months into a job search that had started confidently and eroded slowly into something closer to panic. She'd been laid off from a mid-level marketing position when her company restructured, and 8 months of applications, rejections, and increasingly desperate networking coffee dates had worn her confidence down to something thin and brittle. Her savings had a number in it now that she checked every morning with a specific dread, watching it shrink month over month in a way that made every unanswered application feel like a small physical blow. She had developed, over those 8 months, a private ritual of self-talk that she deployed after every rejection email, reminding herself that the market was difficult right now, that plenty of qualified people were struggling the same way, that this was a temporary condition rather than a verdict on her worth or competence. Some days the ritual worked well enough to get her through to the next application. Other days it did nothing at all, and she found herself staring at her laptop screen for long stretches, unable to summon the energy to write one more cover letter explaining why she was passionate about a company she'd never heard of a week earlier. The first interview for Meridian Holdings came through a recruiter who'd found her profile online, which wasn't unusual in itself, except that Nora, doing the reflexive research she did before every interview, could find almost nothing about the company. No website older than a few weeks, no LinkedIn page listing employees, no business registration she could locate in any public database, though the recruiter assured her when she asked that Meridian was a private holding company that deliberately kept a low public profile. The kind of arrangement common enough among firms that managed other people's money rather than selling products to the public. The first interview itself was unremarkable in every way that mattered. A video call with a hiring manager named Gideon Voss, professional and pleasant, asking the ordinary questions any interview asks, offering answers about the role, a marketing and communications position that sounded exactly like the job she'd been doing before her layoff, only better compensated. Mr. Voss mentioned, near the end of the call, that successful candidates typically came in for a single in-person second interview at Meridian's offices before receiving an offer, and that the position, if offered, would come with unusually generous terms. Salary well above market rate, full benefits from day one, a signing bonus that made Nora's breath catch slightly when she heard the number. She asked, because it seemed like the obvious question, why the position paid so far above what similar roles typically offered. Mr. Voss's answer was smooth and immediate, the kind of answer that sounds complete in the moment and only later reveals itself as having explained nothing at all. Meridian believed in compensating talent generously for a role with, as he put it, a fairly specific commitment structure that he'd explain in full detail during the in-person interview. Nora, hearing unusually generous and signing bonus against a bank balance that had her doing anxious mental math every single day, did not push the question further than that. The second interview was scheduled for the following week, at an office building downtown that Nora had walked past dozens of times without ever registering it. An unremarkable mid-rise with a lobby directory that listed Meridian Holdings on the 7th floor, sandwiched between an accounting firm and what appeared to be an empty suite. The office itself, once she arrived, looked exactly like any other corporate office. Clean, modern furniture, a reception desk, a handful of employees visible through glass-walled conference rooms. Nothing that suggested anything unusual about the company at all. Mr. Voss met her in person, exactly as pleasant as he'd been on the call. A trim man in his 50s, precisely dressed, with the specific, practiced warmth of someone who conducted interviews often enough to have smoothed every rough edge out of the process. He walked her through a tour of the office that felt entirely ordinary, introduced her briefly to 2 or 3 employees who greeted her with polite, unremarkable friendliness, and eventually brought her into a conference room for what he described as the final conversation before an offer would be extended. It was in that conference room that Mr. Voss explained the detail that made Meridian's generous compensation make a strange kind of sense, and that Nora would spend the rest of her life unable to fully stop thinking about. Every position at Meridian Holdings, he explained, came with a fixed 1-year term. Not a 1-year contract in the sense of a renewable agreement, a genuinely fixed term with an end date built into the offer itself from day 1, after which the employee's position concluded entirely, regardless of performance, regardless of the company's needs, regardless of anything except the simple fact that the year was over. Compensation was structured to reflect that finality. The salary, benefits, and signing bonus were, in effect, front-loaded payment for exactly 52 weeks of work, no more, no less, with the company's generosity functioning as a kind of buyout for the certainty of that specific timeline. Nora asked the obvious question: what happened after the year ended? Did employees typically get rehired for a new term, moved to a different role, offered something else within the company? Mr. Voss's answer, delivered with the same smooth, practiced warmth as everything else he'd said, was that former employees did not return to Meridian in any capacity after their term concluded, that this was simply how the company operated, and that every employee who accepted a position understood and agreed to this structure clearly, in writing, before their first day. He assured her this wasn't a termination in any negative sense. Performance reviews, references, everything about the departure would be entirely positive, simply final. It struck Nora as strange, certainly, but not disqualifying. Plenty of contract and consulting roles worked on fixed terms. A year of dramatically above-market pay, with full benefits and a signing bonus large enough to meaningfully rebuild her savings, followed by a clean, positive departure and presumably a strong reference for whatever came next, sounded less like a red flag and more like an unusually honest arrangement, if she was being generous about it, or an unusually generous severance structure, if she wasn't. She asked why the company operated this way. Mr. Voss's answer, this time, was slightly less smooth than his previous ones. A small pause before he spoke, the first genuine hesitation she'd seen from him in the entire process. He said only that Meridian's ownership structure required a specific kind of operational turnover that he wasn't authorized to explain in further detail, and that this was, frankly, the one part of the arrangement candidates simply had to accept on trust if they chose to move forward. Nora, doing the math on 8 months of rejection against a full year of financial security that would let her rebuild everything her savings account had lost, accepted the offer within the week. Her first several months at Meridian were, by any ordinary measure, excellent. The work itself was engaging, the office culture pleasant if slightly reserved, her colleagues friendly without being especially close. In the specific way Nora eventually recognized as a kind of collective emotional distance that she initially assumed was simply corporate professionalism. It was only around month 4 that she began noticing the pattern more directly, that nearly every colleague she'd been introduced to during her tour had by then already left the company, their desks occupied by new hires she hadn't met, the departures happening with a quiet, unremarked regularity that never generated the kind of farewell parties or announcement emails Nora had experienced at previous jobs. She asked a coworker, a woman named Priya who'd started around the same time Nora had, and who Nora had come to consider, cautiously, something close to a work friend, whether she found the constant turnover strange. Priya's answer surprised her with its bluntness. "Everyone here is on the same clock you are," she said. "1 year, then you're done. Nobody talks about it much because there's nothing to talk about. It's just how the job works. You knew that going in, same as me." Nora asked whether Priya knew what happened to people after their year ended, whether she'd ever run into a former Meridian employee afterward, whether anyone stayed in touch. Priya's expression, Nora would remember later, changed in a way that was subtle but unmistakable. A slight stillness, a pause, a beat too long before she answered. "No," she said. "I haven't. I don't think anyone has, actually, now that you're asking. That's a strange thing, isn't it? A whole company's worth of former employees, and none of us know a single one who's still around to ask about it." Neither of them said anything further about it that day, but Nora noticed over the following weeks that the observation had lodged itself somewhere she couldn't shake it loose from. She began, quietly and without telling anyone, trying to locate former Meridian employees online, searching names she remembered from her tour, checking LinkedIn profiles for anyone who listed the company in their work history. She found almost nothing. A handful of profiles listed a year at Meridian Holdings and then simply stopped updating entirely. No new job listed afterward, no recent activity. Accounts that looked less like people who'd moved on to new opportunities and more like accounts that had simply gone dormant the exact month their Meridian year ended. She found no personal social media for any of them either. No wedding announcements, no new baby photos, no ordinary evidence of a life continuing to happen to people who, by any reasonable estimate, should have had years of ordinary life still ahead of them since leaving. She mentioned this, carefully, to Priya, who listened with an expression Nora couldn't quite read, and told her, quietly, that she'd done the exact same search herself around month 3 of her own year, and had found the exact same nothing, and had made a specific, deliberate decision afterward to stop looking, because the not knowing had been easier to carry than whatever answer might have been waiting underneath it. "We've got 8 months left, you and me," Priya said. "I'd rather spend them not thinking about what comes after than spend them the way I spent that 1 week trying to find out. Whatever it is, it's not something we can stop by knowing about it early. I've made my peace with that. You should think about whether you want to make yours." Nora did not entirely take that advice. In her 9th month, with 3 months remaining on her term, she found something that Priya, apparently, either hadn't found or hadn't mentioned. A single, years-old local news article, poorly indexed and barely surfaced by her search, about a man who had worked at Meridian Holdings during the company's earliest years, whose family had reported him missing exactly 1 week after what would have been his final scheduled day of employment, and who had never been located. The article was brief, factual, and offered no resolution. A small, forgotten local story that had clearly never generated enough public interest to be followed up on, filed away and buried under a decade of more current search results. Nora did not tell Priya what she'd found. She told herself this was because she didn't want to frighten her colleague over what was almost certainly an unrelated, tragic coincidence. A single missing persons case, from years before either of them had worked there, that had nothing demonstrably to do with the company's employment structure. She told herself this several times, in fact, with the specific repetition of someone trying to convince themselves of something they didn't fully believe. Her final month at Meridian passed in a haze of forced normalcy, completing handoff documentation, training the person who would presumably occupy her role for their own year, attending what Mr. Voss described as an standard, pleasant off-boarding meeting that covered final paperwork, a genuinely glowing letter of reference, and the last portion of her signing bonus. Held in reserve, he explained, specifically to be paid out on successful completion of the full term. Her actual last day involved nothing dramatic at all. She said goodbye to Priya, who hugged her with what felt like real warmth, and said, "Good luck out there. I mean that." She turned in her badge, signed a final set of paperwork, and walked out of the office building into an ordinary afternoon, her final paycheck and bonus already confirmed in her bank account, her year at Meridian Holdings complete in every measurable, documented way. She has not, in the 2 years since, been able to locate Priya online in any capacity. She has not been able to locate any of the colleagues she worked alongside during that year, all of whom, as far as any search she has run can determine, simply stopped existing in any public, searchable way the exact month their own terms concluded. Nora is fine. She wants that understood clearly whenever she thinks about telling this story to someone new. She completed her year, was paid exactly as promised, received a reference that helped her land a genuinely good position afterward, and has lived an entirely ordinary life since leaving Meridian Holdings, with no incident, no threat, nothing resembling the vague dread she carried through her final months there ever actually materializing into anything concrete. She has simply made a specific, permanent decision, the same one Priya once described to her in that conference room hallway, to stop looking for anyone she used to work with. She tells herself this is because the search never turned up anything but ordinary explanations she simply hadn't found yet. People who changed their names, people who moved abroad, people who deliberately scrubbed their online presence for reasons entirely unrelated to Meridian. She tells herself this with the same repetition she once used to reassure herself about the missing man's article, and she has decided, deliberately, that some explanations are better left unconfirmed, one way or the other, for the rest of her life. Occasionally, on nights when sleep won't come easily, she finds herself doing the math again anyway. 13 colleagues she can still name from memory, 13 searches she's promised herself she won't run again, and 0 results, across 2 years of not looking, that have ever contradicted what she already suspected the very first time she typed a name into a search bar and watched the results come back empty. She has never told her current employer, her current friends, or the man she's been dating for the past 8 months any of the specific details of that year. She tells the story, when it comes up at all, as an unusually generous and unusually strange job she once had, and leaves it there, and has found that most people are satisfied enough with that version not to ask the follow-up questions she'd have no good answers for anyway. If you are ever offered something that seems generous enough to answer every problem you currently have, you might want to ask, carefully and early, exactly what makes the offer able to afford being that generous. Some companies pay well because they value their people. Others pay well because they know, from the very first day, exactly how little time they'll need to. This has been a Whisper Dark original. If this one made you think twice about your next job offer, you know what to do. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the dark next time.